Dan Man's a man, man of man, all man, Dan Man.
He's all man.
Dan Man is all man. And when he takes off on rights and lefts, I go, oh man, because you know what? He only goes front side. Yeah, when Dan Man took off on his first wave, I was like, oh yeah, sick. He was regular foot, and then he got a sick one. I was like, yeah, right on, cool. And then I was like waiting. Then this other guy comes back, because I know he was the only guy there, and then this goofy foot came back, and I was like, wait, where did Dan Man go? And then he came past me, and I noticed it was him. I'm like, wait a moment, it blew my mind. I was like, what the hell?
This is Dan Man, and he is the frontside warrior. He only goes frontside no matter which way he's going. But you know, it's kind of like you're almost in the same position, right?
Yeah.
It's just the feet are tricking themselves.
No, you still have the same pivot point.
Yeah, same pivot point. Yeah. So needless to say, he is not able to surf on an asymmetric surfboard. It has to be symmetric.
That's why I don't buy into those things.
You were like surfing's version of Nota Begay, who was a golfer that
way.
Depending on which way it curved, he would always putt into the curve.
Switch.
Right, or left.
That's pretty rad.
If it was right to left, he would always putt right-handed and vice versa. So Dan and I have been working on some shapes for a while. We didn't actually even realize we had worked on a shape for 2 years after it had been shaped.
Yeah.
We made it. What happened was you made 3 boards for me.
Yep.
2 were round pins. 1 was a squash. The squash felt really nice at times, and then all of a sudden, once in a while, I don't know, maybe it was just a little too much lift in the tail or something, and sometimes it just felt a little funny in the turns. And so I didn't ever ride the round pins, the round tail boards. Fast forward 2 years, they're sitting in my storage at my house. A friend of mine from Florida who's about probably 10 or 15 pounds lighter than me, he said, you got anything a little thinner than what you ride? And I said, well, I got these boards, and I think they're a little too fine for me. And he rode it and rode a few waves at lowers, and he said, man, I think this thing would be super sick for you. It feels too big for me. He said, here, try this thing for 1 wave, and I jumped on, and first bottom turn off the top, I was like, man, this board's insane. And that's what this FRK is. That was the first version of it. I'm like almost 4 years deep with this thing, technically, 3.5.
Technically, yeah.
Right? No.
Yeah. Oh, 15.
Wait,
July 15.
So I didn't start riding until 17, so 15. Yeah, it'll be 4 years in September that we're, since the inception of making these. Now I look at this board, just seeing it, the lines look so good. The rocker looks so clean. The rail's very fine, but that's what keeps surprising me, is that fine of a rail is fine for me. I think a lot of people will pick this up and think, oh, I need a bigger size. And I'm gonna kind of say, hey, I'm gonna push back a little and say, kind of go the one that feels just too small for you, and try it.
Yeah.
Don't get psyched out by the thickness here, because there's more thickness in the center. And once you're up and planing, that's the one thing about small boards. It's all about planing and surface area and the way that board lifts and rides on the water. I mean, anyone can ride a skimboard. You can't paddle a skimboard, but you can float on it. It's got enough planing surface, so once you get to a certain speed, you're planing, like a boat. And so the idea is just to be up planing enough to make the thing work. Because you're not, another thing with Surf Ranch is so many people say, should we ride an epoxy? Should we ride something thicker? Should I get a fuller rail? Because it's fresh water, not salt water. And once you are at planing speed on anything, it doesn't matter if there's salt or fresh water. It really just, there's no difference at all.
Or pixie
I mean,
dust.
do you feel
Nope.
a difference here when you surf? Yeah.
You still want the
But do you,
the
maybe
principles.
you need to keep testing.
I really think I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel like I've had nearly enough testing.
Yeah. Well, go try to make sure. I gotta ride 17 different board designs.
I need another top priority on the right, out at the top, please. Thank you.
But I don't know. I look at this board, and to me, for what the standard is today for a top performance board, this board looks perfect. The lines all look great. The template's great. The rocker's smooth. It has a very subtle bottom curve on it.
So one thing you may not remember that I had burned in my head was that February before the Quickie Pro in 2015, before I made the boards.
Yep.
We were standing there, we had a board on the ground, and I was showing you a board of mine. And it was more of a traditional round pin with more of a tip on the, and you're like, with your toes, you're like, I want a straight spot. I like my round tails to have a straight spot here, and you pointed here, right behind the fins. And then, and you're all, and a more elliptical tail, and you pointed there. And then we just changed the subject and started talking about something else. So I had a hand shape to get it just right from the original file when I designed it on the computer because I was kind of shooting in the dark. And then as soon as it was shaped out, I made a template, and then I just converted that template into the software because I knew I had hopes that he'd like it, and if he did like it, you'd have to repeat it exactly. So I had to convert it over through a couple iterations to get the tail outline perfect, not hand-shaped perfect. You know what I mean? Because the width here is like this where your foot is, it seems like has to be, especially on your like 5'9". There's something going on with your toe when you're digging in right here.
The best ways I've ever gotten on an FRK, actually,
J-Bay snap.
maybe J-Bay, yeah, maybe at J-Bay. Some lower stuff that I don't know if anybody filmed, but at J-Bay it felt really good. I was really surprised it felt so good at J-Bay because it was super windy. It was a pretty big swell. You know, it was like a 6 to 8 foot, 6 foot day at J-Bay, and which means 12 feet for some reason. And right?
Yep.
Yeah. 10 to 12 foot on the
Why?
face.
We don't know.
I have a theory on this, but anyway, so at J-Bay, and it was real windy and cold, and I was in a wetsuit, so I probably weighed an extra 10 pounds with the water and everything. And I took the board with me, thinking, with the epoxy, with that blank that we used, it might be too flexy, it might be too light in the wind, because you always hear people say that.
Yeah.
But the one thing about a light board, you don't get that momentum quite like you get with the heavier board, but because it's so much lighter, you can whip the thing around quicker. So the wind doesn't actually affect it as much in one way. But taking it to J-Bay, I kind of took it thinking, if the waves are like head high, this could be a really great board for there. And then when I rode it and the waves were a bit bigger, I was really surprised at how nice it drew a carve out, because it really was a very light board.
And the turns on that, it was just like, whoa, to see something I made do that.
It just got this life to it. I have always liked epoxy boards in really small waves. I've always preferred them over traditional materials because they have a little bit more flex. They just get a little bit more life, and in a small wave when you're not going so fast, they don't kind of flush out. They don't flex too much. They flex enough to kind of almost give you like a spring back. I think you probably have to be pretty sensitive to understand that and have surfed for a long time to feel that. Like a beginner might not feel that, but somebody who's surfed for a long time would feel that extra life. And I hear from guys who don't surf epoxies very often, and then they try one. They're like, wow, in small waves, it's insane. And that's the thing. They really have a nice life in small waves. But the other session that comes to mind is I got one of these straight out of the factory. And I brought it here to Surf Ranch.
The first sample,
It felt unbelievable. Same thing again. When I picked this thing up at the factory, I was like, it's too fine, it's too small. Even this one right now, I'm like, it's too small, it won't float me, whatever, all that stuff in my head. I get it on a wave, and the thing feels like I can mind surf it. Yeah. This thing really jumps and drives to where I want it to. We'll find out today.
We'll find out. The true test.
Yeah. The moral of the story, children, is that if you get rejected, it could come around a couple years later.
Persevere. Just hold the line, man. Hold the line. It may take 20 years.
Here's what you got to do. You have to send one of these to David Spear.
That's what I should do.
Because
Dave's thinner.
Because Dave's the one who was riding
Absolutely.
it.
On me. So,